Century Talk Radio, you're in to all things music.
And so I was subjecting myself to hours upon hours of adult contemporary Christian radio, thinking at some point it would start to make sense. And it didn't. but one night, all that changed because they started to play something else. So it was the very first song that I heard in the middle of a CCM like adult song. They picked the needle up off the record and they said things are changing, and they started to play what turned out to be Renaissance Man from the first 77's record, and I was just gone. And I got so excited I unplugged they played a bunch of songs, and by the time they got to Res Band, I unplugged the headphones, and so the sound came blasting out of the speakers, and I'm jumping around. This is Christian music. I can't believe it. My parents were freaked out, like, oh no, he's finally lost it. The pressure is blood. He's the poor kid.
Welcome to Intersect Radio, where music, faith, and life converge. With your host, Aaron the A-Train Smith.
Piano playing down the hall, a ghostly couple dances, and bold in shadows paint the wall, looking for second chances.
Welcome to another Tuesday of Intersect Radio. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And it's been a great day here in Tennessee. Tuesday, I just finished mowing the lawn, so I'm pretty stiff and tired. But it had to be done. It had to be done. We have a great show for you here today. But before we get to that, I'd like to first shout out to our sponsors, Pitbull Audio, Studio Instrument Rentals, and my friends over at Innovative Percussion. They make the greatest drumsticks ever made on this planet. Truly. Today, my guest is my good friend, great Christian brother, Mr. John Joseph Thompson. The music you just heard is from his band, The Wayside. And, John has quite the varied resume. So I'm just going to give you a little introduction, because if I gave you the whole thing, it'd take up today's show. So I'm just going to give you a little taste of it here. And we're fortunate that John lives very close to me. He actually walked over here in about 7 minutes. So we're like face to face today, folks, and it's great. So John is a 30-year music industry veteran, author, songwriter, artist, producer, pastor, music critic, and teacher who currently serves as Associate Dean of the Trevecca School of Music and Worship. Worship Arts, and is Director of Publishing for E One Nashville. Until recently, he was Creative Director at Capitol CMG Publishing. He's the author of 2 books, Raised by Wolves, The Story of Christian Rock and Roll. That's at ECW Press. And the other is his most current writing, Jesus, Bread and Chocolate, Crafting a Handmade Faith in a Mass Market World, on Zondervan, Harper Collins. So,
making me tired.
I'm telling you, man. I'm not reading the whole thing here. I'm just, because I want you to tell us about the whole thing. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to Intersect, Mr. John Joseph Thompson.
Hey, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure, man.
I was just telling you, if 15-year-old me could know that 40 years later he'd be walking a few blocks to Aaron Smith's house to talk to him about stuff like this, 15-year-old me would drop dead. Right
That's
there.
crazy. That's crazy. I'm telling you.
Yeah, it's great to be
But,
here.
7 minutes.
Yeah. And that's because I was taking my time.
Yeah.
I knew I was early.
Tell him the story about the car.
Oh, so when we first moved here to East Nashville, 2007, my oldest son, Jordan, was learning how to drive. And that was my first kid to teach how to drive. So it was very stressful for both of us. And I had this white Volvo station wagon called the Skull. And because what else would you call a white station wagon but the Skull? And so we're driving around the neighborhood, and Jordan was driving, and he was kind of stressed out. He couldn't take any more. He just had to stop. And we were just in these back streets. And so I said, just this next driveway right here, just pull into this driveway and we'll switch and I'll drive home. No big deal. We pull into the driveway, and then I'm looking in the window of the house. I can see somebody standing in the window looking out at me. And I realize, whoever's house this is thinks someone's here to see him. So I kind of wave, but then I look a little closer, and as my head kind of cocks a little bit, like, a curious dog, the guy behind the window, his head cocks a little bit. I realize, is that A-Train? Of all the houses in Nashville, I didn't know that you lived at, and I happened to pull, or Jordan happened to pull into your driveway, and that further cemented the untrue myth that my kids have that everybody knows me. You can randomly pull into a driveway in East Nashville, and it's an old friend of your dad's.
That was crazy, man. We were all sitting here in the house having dinner, and this car stops, and it's like, who is that? We don't know anybody.
That was crazy.
Are they lost? Well, John, you've had quite a life thus far. And, I was reading in your book, your last writing, your most current writing, Jesus, Bread, and Chocolate, which I would suggest that you all go out and buy, get on the internet now. When we take the first break here, it's enough time to get on the internet and go get the book. You have a great story of your childhood upbringing. And, in comparison, my childhood was very boring.
Yeah. Well, you were playing on Papa Was a Rolling Stone when I was listening to that going, oh my gosh, this song is about my life. I was a little kid.
And even a little bit deeper,
Right.
So why don't you share some of that with us?
Well, the first, I say this, it's kind of the first 10 years of my life, and it was pretty dark. I mean, there's no other way to put it. It was a pretty messed up situation. And for a long time, I just wouldn't talk about it. So there's a couple of times I shared some things, and a couple of people spread the story, and that freaked me out about sharing the story. So I kind of shut down over it. Mm-hmm. But one person who you've spoken to recently that was a big encouragement for me in this was Glenn Kaiser. I told him this whole thing years and years ago, and he's been bugging me for years to write a book about it. And I just couldn't bring myself to write a whole book just about that. It was just too, it was just, no. But when I started to work on this book, at the beginning of this process, I didn't even think that story was relevant. So the first draft of the book doesn't have anything about my childhood or any of that kind of stuff in it at all. My editor was pushing back with me around some things because I would make some statements that were clearly referencing some kind of deep-seated hunger, and she kept pushing me to go there and think about that and contemplate that. So then I added the backstory, about that. So in a nutshell, my mom was married to the wrong person. She got married young. She married a guy who was a sociopath and alcoholic and abusive, and it was a kind of a con man, sort of C-rate criminal, who would steal people's money and then pack us up in the middle of the night and we'd move. And I always said that if he had more discipline, he would have been a gangster, but he was not disciplined enough for that life. But he was just a
smooth criminal.
Yeah, he was just a con man, basically. And again, I was a little kid, so what I even know about that is small. I just knew that he was pretty scary. He could toggle between, which most sociopaths will, he would have these moments of wanting to be the great dad, most of the time you were just afraid, and he would blow up and it could get violent and stuff. So, so that was sort of our life. And for about, I don't remember, a few years we lived in this rundown farm outside of Peoria, Illinois. And we were kind of, I think we lived there because it was so far in the middle of nowhere that he could kind of hide out there when he needed to and nobody would find him, I think. But then he ended up opening up a restaurant, and it was just, really? It was a wild, weird thing that I've never come to the bottom of it, which is probably a good thing. But I have heard, as an adult, I've heard some more stories that have kind of fleshed out the other aspects of his personality, the non-monster parts. But he was a messed up person. And so I grew up with that. My mom got saved. You know, she had her salvation experience during the Jesus movement in the early 70s. So she had grown up in the church, so she was a good Episcopal girl, and but she met these people who took it really seriously and had a much more vital kind of understanding of that. And she had that experience, got baptized, started listening to all this Jesus music, and I was about 3. So I have very, very faint memories of that. I have plenty of memories of the music because it lasted a lot longer. But so I grew up with that. She tells me that I asked her why she was crying, and she said, "Oh, these are good tears," you know. And she tells me that I wanted to know what had happened, and she told me she had Jesus in her heart. So I said, "Well, I want that too." I don't even remember that stuff. Like my sense of the immediacy and presence of God goes back earlier than my conscious memories. But then when you layer in the visible world and the dysfunction that I was surviving, it set up kind of a tense relationship between me and God. Like I couldn't not believe in God, but I also felt very forgotten or neglected or something like that. So music definitely, by the time I was little, was a huge escape thing for me. And it's funny, we're sitting here with these headphones on because I have a picture. It's actually, I can't remember it's in the book, but it's in some of the marketing materials, but we found it. It's a picture of me with these headphones back in the 70s, and they were the headphones that have radios built into them, the antennas that would go up. And once I got those, it was just, it was like I could just put those things on and turn on the radio and literally drown out the fighting, drown out the scary stuff. And I started to just scan the dial and find music that took me away. So some of it was some of the early stuff. It was pretty diverse. It was Johnny Cash and old country stuff, and it was Stevie Wonder and James Brown and a lot of soul stuff. I loved the Isley Brothers. I loved. I didn't have a peer group that was telling me, "Oh, this is the kind of music you're supposed to like." You know, I just kind of scanned the dial on the little knob on the headphones, and I found gospel stuff. And at night, in the middle of Illinois, at night when the sun goes down, you can pick up radio from really far away. Yeah. And that felt really cool, too. Yeah. So I could listen to jazz stuff from Chicago and blues stuff.
How far were you from Chicago?
About 3 hours.
Okay.
So AM radio could make the drive. FM, not so much.
Yeah, yeah.
I think my mom got me an Isley Brothers T-shirt from a secondhand store, and that having the T-shirt first got me to go, okay, I need to find out about the Isley Brothers. I remember calling a radio station once and saying, "Do you have any records by the Isley Brothers?" And it wasn't whatever their format was. And they said, "Well, maybe." And I said, "Well, I just want to hear what they sound like." So I actually requested some, like, this is my personal MP3 player in 1978.
Okay, so, and then you guys got a big stereo system, right?
Well, so long story short, and when I was 10 years old, we had to go into hiding to get away from my father. So my mom took us, my brothers and I, and we disappeared, and we stayed at this Christian rescue mission in Aurora, Illinois, called Wayside Cross, which is actually where we get the name for the band. And then they moved us to a Christian camp outside of Chicago, and we had to stay underground because things were that scary with him. So for a while, we were just hiding basically at this camp. After that, a couple of years later, you know, when things settled down, my mom met the guy who became my dad now. He married my mom when I was 13, and he adopted me when I was 18. And so he was the one who came when my mom met this guy, and he had a son from his first marriage, and she had 4 boys from her first marriage, and then they got married, and then they had a baby, and there was 6 kids and 2 adults living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Glen Ellen, Illinois. And he he had the cool stereo. He had been in rock bands in the 60s, which was definitely the thing that first got me to go, okay, well, maybe this guy's okay. You know, he was in a band called 10 Killer Lake in Texas back in the 60s. I thought that was pretty bad to the bone. So he had the cool stereo system, and I would listen to it on headphones most of the time because we just didn't have much space. But yeah, and that's where I first heard you guys.
Yeah. So as you were telling me the story, the rest of the family is watching TV, and you're sitting in the living room with the stereo going. You got your headphones on, and it's the kind of back then, folks. You know, if you plugged in your headphones, it turned off the speakers, so nobody else could hear the music.
Right.
So that's how John could enjoy music in the presence of his family while they enjoyed TV, and nobody disturbed the other. Until one night, you're listening to, is it a Christian radio station?
It was WCRM in Dundee, Illinois. Yeah. So I had decided, I'd had this experience. I went to this youth retreat at a charismatic Episcopal church in Bath, Ohio, and it kind of had my moment of saying, okay, God, I'll take you seriously. And it wasn't a salvation experience as much because I was always a believer, but it was definitely a time when I felt like God was saying I needed to really trust. And it was all for me about forgiveness and about healing and starting that process of crawling out of the hole that I was in emotionally and psychologically. And so after that, I had that exuberance of kind of a spiritual rebirth and awakening. And I noticed that a lot of the spiritually mature Christians that I knew listened to Christian music. And I had one Christian band that I knew of, DeGarmo and Key. My grandma bought me one tape, and I liked that tape. But the rest of the Christian music I knew about was my mom's stuff, Cynthia Clausen and Evie and Amy Grant and like the early Amy Grant stuff. And it was fine, but it wasn't from my planet. You know, I was listening to Talking Heads and New Wave stuff and blues stuff and 60s, a lot of 60s stuff. So that I was listening to this Christian radio station thinking, well, eventually I'll learn how to like it. I figured it was like coffee. Like nobody would like, when I was a kid, you try coffee, you hate it, but somehow grown-ups all learned how to like coffee.
Right.
I figured I'd learn how to like it.
Secret to it.
Yeah. And so I was subjecting myself to hours upon hours of adult contemporary Christian radio thinking at some point it would start to make sense. And it didn't. but one night, all that changed because they started to play something else. So it was the very first song that I heard in the middle of a CCM like adult song. They picked the needle up off the record and they said things are changing, and they started to play what turned out to be Renaissance Man from the first 77s record, and I was just gone. And I got so excited I unplugged they played a bunch of songs, and by the time they got to Res Band, I unplugged the headphones, and so the sound came blasting out of the speakers, and I'm jumping around. This is Christian music. I can't believe it. My parents were freaked out, like, oh no, he's finally lost it. The pressure is blood. He's the poor kid.
This is Christian music, Dad,
it was
Mom,
like
everybody,
metal.
really?
It was
seriously.
Fun.
Yeah.
And my dad said in that moment, he knew I was gone. He's like, you found he could relate to it being in a rock band, but I found my tribe, and I was going to.
That's cool.
Join the circus.
Oh, man, I love that story. We're going to take a break, folks, and right after this commercial break from our sponsors, we'll be right back with my guest, John Joseph Thompson.
Are you serious about your music? Are you ready to run with the big dogs? The experts at Pitbull Audio have the gear to get you into the game. From leading manufacturers like Mesa Boogie, Fender, Pioneer, and American Audio. To sound your best, you need the best. Pitbull Audio can deliver in rehearsal, on stage, and into the big time. Dropping beats, shredding guitar, or making the crowd roar. Whatever you dream, Pitbull Audio can help make it happen. We are Pitbull Audio. We want you to play it loud. PitbullAudio.com.
You know what's all around you every waking moment of your life? Marketing. You're choking on it. I'm Scott Robertson, and when it comes to strategic PR, branding, and marketing, I've seen it all. And actually, I'm still seeing it because bad marketing never sleeps. Join me each week on May the Best Brand Win, right here on Intertalk Radio, and learn how to make the marketing for your brand unforgettable.
Hi,
Hi, I'm Tim Dolbear, the host of Sound Experience on Intertalk Radio. Each week, I talk with top professional audio engineers, producers, musicians, and the manufacturers that make the tools that we use in the studio each and every day. From capturing the perfect take to mastering your final release, and the tools and how the pros use them, we are going to dive deep into their process and learn from their experience. I look forward to you joining us each week on Sound Experience with me, your host, Tim Dolbear.
This is Jackie Bertoni from Jackie's Groove. Come join me weekly on my journey through the music business as I take you behind the velvet rope, interviewing industry notables such as Al Di Meola, Michael McDonald, and Al Jarreau, to name but a few. Listen to their stories on being in the studios recording #1 hits and onto the stages throughout the globe. Allow me to be your music historian. You can hear me live every Monday at 2 p.m. and every Wednesday at 12 noon Pacific Standard Time or 24/7 on jackiesgroove.com. Ready to get your groove on?
Welcome to Intersect Radio, where music, faith, and life converge. With your host, Aaron the A-Train Smith.
I've done some awful things, as you can plainly see. Said some lies, made puppy eyes, gotten off scot-free. I've been a prodigal, spent evenings with some swine. But here I am, had in my hand a mile from vine. Now I'm not asking for you to trust me again, and I'm not asking for any rules to bend. I'm just begging you here in the dirt and on my knees. Please, please, please forgive me.
That's music by my guest today, Mr. John Joseph Thompson and his band, The Wayside.
That stuff sounded so much crazier in Chicago than it does here in Nashville.
I know.
It was downright rebellious up there.
Yeah, it fits right in here, That's what they do here.
It is, isn't it?
Well, before the break, John was telling us about his discovery of Christian music he understood.
Yeah.
And his people. He found his tribe. He found his people. And so how from that, John, where did that spearhead you to? Where did that propel you into?
It's interesting that not Seth Godin, but Malcolm Gladwell talks about how it's a combination when you find that you have people that accomplish some stuff or whatever. I mean, he some people call it genius. He's disabusing people of the word genius, but he says really it's about access, opportunity, interest, and aptitudes, and he kind of breaks that down. And I think that I was very fortunate to, for one thing, be in a family that encouraged this. So as I got obsessed about this music that nobody had heard of, they just encouraged me to go find it. So my aunts and uncles and my mom and dad and my adopted father all started to just support this crazy quest of mine. And part of it was finding records from hard-to-find artists like Larry Norman and stuff like that. It was also starting very early to be me writing my own music, which was terrible for quite a while. but they encouraged it. They'd actually they'd move the dining room table out of the dining room and set up a little stage and have little concerts and that was all. I think anybody that's kind of dealing with pressure, dealing with stress, dealing with trauma, hopefully you find a way out of that. And for me, that was through creativity. And so it was through music. And some of it was my own music, but a lot of it was finding. I needed to hear things like the 77s and Steve Taylor and some groups like The Call, some mainstream groups that had a strong spirituality to it. T-Bone Burnett. I needed to hear that stuff as a young kid to just cast my imagination that was even possible. Because, I loved old music, and I identified more with old music than modern music at that point. But the best music seemed to be about either material stuff or just emptiness, with the exception of Dylan and a few others. There was just, in the early 80s, music was about hairspray and spandex and MTV. There was nothing deep going on in a lot of it, Right. So that radio station every night from 9 to midnight would play a wide range from metal stuff to punk stuff to import stuff, hard to find things. And I started to get blank cassettes and just record every night. And I would collect the tapes and I would listen to the tapes all day. And then the show would come on at night and I'd record that one. And in fact, I just found about 7 of these old tapes in my archives, and I was also pretty sick. I had a lot of health problems, which I didn't really talk about too much in the book, but my stomach was making too much acid. I had a lot of internal bleeding, and it took them years to figure that out and get it fixed. So I ended up quite sick and missing a lot of school and home alone a lot of days. And there's no TV back then during the day except soap operas and game shows and stuff. So it was records and radio stations. And I started to write letters to bands. So I remember writing a letter to the Altar Boys and saying, I love your music and this is really cool. And do you have any sheet music? Because I play guitar and I play piano. Could you send me sheet music? And I got a handwritten letter from their bass player, Rick Alba. And he said, this is the first fan letter we've gotten from outside of California. He was really excited. I'm thinking they're the biggest band. Like, I thought all of the bands were huge bands, famous and, well-to-do. And he said, he goes, well, I can't give you any sheet music because none of us actually know how to read music. He said, but most of the songs have about 3 chords and one of them's usually a D. So if you were to figure that out, maybe that'll help you. So I kept that letter tacked up in my bedroom wall, and I got letters back from Res Band and from all kinds of groups. And then I started to build relationships like that. And it drove me crazy that nobody seemed to know about this music. Mm-hmm. And it didn't seem, when I played it for my friends, they didn't mind that it was inspired by Christian ideas. That didn't bother anybody if they encountered it in the right way. If I simply said, you need to hear this record, this thing is amazing, and I played it for them, they would either like it or not like it. But it wasn't a turn off by saying, oh, here's Christian music, you need to listen to this Christian music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I realized that most of the marketing vehicles for getting that, a lot of those bands were lumped into the stuff that was pretty much just for Christians. Mm-hmm. And so the 77s weren't like that, and Vector wasn't like that. Mm-hmm. So I just started to recognize that there was this gap between the artists and the audience. And I saw myself as head fan of the audience side, but I also imagined myself someday also being an artist doing that stuff. So I was going to set about building a bridge. And it was actually after the Sevens show at Cornerstone 84. I was 13. I was almost 14. And when I saw that show, I actually said to my youth pastor at the time, I was like, I have to do this. Like this should be this is the best music I've ever heard. And there should be millions of people that would like this music. We just have to talk about it better. We have to talk about it differently. We shouldn't have to go to Christian bookstores and push past the Precious Moments figures and the cheesy, artwork of white Jesus, to find this stuff. That doesn't make any sense. So that was literally the whole manifesto kind of came to me at that first Cornerstone. And I said, I'm going to make it my business to get this stuff out there because it meant so much to me. Like, there's not even a way to adequately describe how much it meant to me. And I think the analogy I use in the book is I feel like I was listening under the door to a conversation that other people were having, and I wanted to be in that room. And the art, the music, especially the stuff that was more on the alternative side and the rock, like, experimental side, and then some of the mainstream stuff that we found as a result of that. Mm-hmm. It was really, that was the room I wanted to be in. Those are the conversations I wanted to have. I wanted to create that kind of work and have that. I wanted to have the kind of impact on other people that it was having on me. Really, that's kind of what it boiled down to.
Right.
So that's what I set about doing.
So how did you get started? That's a pretty big thing to grasp and to move, given the time and the context of the music. Not too many people were, there weren't too many outlets for CCM or Christian music, Christian rock, especially Christian rock.
Right.
Because not even the church wanted to hear that. Right. Right. So how did you set about doing your thing?
For me, I think I was blessed by naivete. Like, I was so young that I didn't have any idea what was reasonable or not. I just wanted to do this. And so I started, like I said, by listening to the records, finding as many as I could, writing to the artists, starting to actually communicate. And then I started to realize that I was shocked to find out that most of them couldn't make a full-time living doing that, that they had other jobs. That blew my mind. That blew my mind. So then I also found that they were limited in terms of where they could get their music, that they couldn't play in clubs. I couldn't have gotten into a club at that point in my life, but I realized that, churches weren't going to bring that kind of music in for the most part, and MTV wasn't going to play it. When they did, it was shocking to everybody. Everybody stopped what they were doing because, did you hear that they played that video at 1 in the morning?
1 in the morning.
Right.
Yeah.
But the other problem, and I honestly identified this in my own mind when I was pretty young, was that it was that idea of calling it Christian rock. Like, as soon as that happened, I was like, well, then you've already lost it. Like, because my grandma told me when she gave me that first Cigar One key tape, oh, this is Christian music. And I remember thinking, well, I love my grandma, and I'm sure she means well, but I assumed that music would be subpar. I don't know why I assumed that, but I did. Now I know why, because a lot of it is subpar. But if you just talked about it as being great, underground, spiritually provocative music, and you used better words, everybody was interested. So I started to identify, and again, I had all this free time because I was sick all the time. So I was at home with notebooks and pencils and time. So I started to graph out what are the challenges. The challenges were the media. There was no media talking about this kind of stuff that I knew of. There was no radio playing this stuff, except in my city there was this one station that late at night concerts were hard to get to. Chicago had better concert scene for this stuff than in almost any other city, because it was that happy coincidence that I was in the Chicago area where Quincy and the Syndicate people, Paul Emery, was bringing in cool bands and putting them at the Odeum and putting them at Wheaton College and putting them at Judson. Most kids my age didn't have access to that. So I got to go see a lot of this music that other people didn't have access to. But the live piece was a part of it. And when you go to Cornerstone and you see several thousand fans gathered around 100 bands, and that really became sort of the home planet where I was like, now this is where I want to stay. And I remember after Cornerstone 85, I went with a bunch of strangers and spent the whole time there meeting new friends. And it was the time of my life, and I did not want it to end. And when I had to go home, I was desperately depressed that the real world sucked compared to Cornerstone. So then I was like, what do I got to do? I have to make the Cornerstone thing happen for myself all year. And if other people are going to enjoy it, then great. So really, True Tunes, this thing that I started, was kind of an extension of the Cornerstone experience, and it was going to be all year. And it was going to focus around all of those things I had identified that were missing: the retail piece, the magazine piece, the concert piece, the radio piece. And so I wrote up this vision statement when I was 15 and said, this is what I'm going to do. I even had the name True Tunes. I kind of had a logo. That's important. You have to have a logo first. That's the 80s rock kid in me. Yeah. And then I just started banging on doors until I could find somebody that would take me up on it. Because I was, again, too naive to know what I was asking was completely unreasonable. It didn't make any sense. But I was a kid, and I just said, this is what I want to do. I think I also had heard from several of the artists as I got to know them the fact that they couldn't support a family, they couldn't do it full time. And I thought, well, if someday I'm going to have a day job, I want the day job to be about this music as well. So then my side thing can be my music, and my day job can be about this True Tunes thing. And so I kind of built this whole thing.
You built your own empire.
Somebody once told me, it was like, I found a small town and I made myself mayor. Empire would be putting it way too grandiose, but I definitely decided to find other people like me.
So how did you get around to knocking on doors?
I literally, right before I turned 16, my mom and dad were saying, okay, you're going to need to get a job. And I wanted a car, so I was going to have money for a car, and that's how it goes. And so I got my mom to drive me to all these Christian bookstores that had music departments that I had been going and finding records. And most of them, they all liked me. I was a very good customer, but I was also a real pain because I was always asking for the stuff that they couldn't find. I was asking for that weird after the fire import from Belgium or something like that. And But my mom drove me around to, I think it was 5 different Christian bookstores. And I went in to each one, and I was 15. I wasn't quite 16 yet. And at each of them I said, although they knew who I was, I said, I would like to work here. I said, and I will do anything you want. I'll clean the bathrooms. I'm really good at that. You know, I've been cleaning houses for my mom's company for a while. I said, I'll do anything. I'll even sell Precious Moments figures. I'll get over my total revulsion, and I will act that. But I said, I insist on, part of the deal is I have to be able to run the music department based on this vision that I think God has given me. I'm 15. And I said, and if you take me up on this, I'll double your music sales, whatever they are, in a year. And that's where you get the whole, like, what was I thinking? How could I even say? I had no idea what their music sales were. I just had nothing but determination. Yeah. And every one of those stores offered me a job. They all said I could come and work there as a stock boy or whatever, but none of them were going to take me up on the idea of letting me run the music department, because they knew that I was going to jack it all up and bring a bunch of freaks into their Christian bookstore. Until I met a guy, because I won tickets to Cornerstone 85, and this is a trip too. I won tickets by calling WCRM and beating Glenn Kaiser at Res Band Trivia.
Oh, you beat Glenn?
I did. Oh. And I won a ticket to Cornerstone 85, and I called Japusa, the people that put on Cornerstone, and I said, hey, I'm 15 years old. I just won a ticket to Cornerstone, but I have nobody to take me. Do you have any youth groups in the suburbs of Chicago that you could tell me about? I'm going to go join a youth group so I can go with them. And they gave me the name of a guy in Wheaton who had bought 30 or 40 tickets and assumed it was a youth group. Turns out he was this guy named Matt Wielgus, and Matt was part of this Catholic renewal group called The Happening. And so a bunch of Catholic college kids that were really on fire for God were going to Cornerstone together. And they gave me his number, and I called him, and he said, well, I got to go up to the radio station. Why don't you come with me, and we'll get to know each other. And in the drive, he found out how passionate I was about this music. Turns out he was the music buyer for a religious bookstore in Wheaton, and he said, I'm going to go off to college. Why don't you take my job? So that's how I got in the door, and I went to that guy, and his name was Phil Teskett. I made him the same deal. I said, I'll double your music sales in a year. I'll do whatever. First day, I tarred the roof. I literally was tarring the roof in 100-degree heat with Matt. Second day and third day, I was stapling video catalogs all day long. Then I started to deliver candles to churches all over Chicago. But then I got to manage the music department. And sure enough, in about a year, I had doubled the sales, and then I doubled them again. And then I went to him when I was 17, and I gave him a business plan, and I said, I want to open up True Tunes. And he agreed to finance the whole thing. And
wow.
The rest was history.
Man, that's incredible. I don't remember what I was thinking at 15. Other than, how can I get out of this town? I remember being very occupied with that at 15, 16, because it seemed like the only future I had was working at American Tobacco Company, like most people in my hometown. But that's great, man. I'm glad.
Well, it sounds like we were doing the same thing. I was getting out of town too. It just wasn't a geographic town.
Right. You were getting out of town and bringing others in town.
That's right.
Folks, this is great conversation. We got to take another break here. Thank you all for tuning in. Again, thank you to Pitbull Audio and Studio Instrument Rentals for their support of Intertalk Radio. And we'll be back right after these messages. Thank you.
Hi, this is Tim Dolbear, host of Sound Experience here on Intertalk Radio. And Source Connect by Source Element is the essential tool that we use to link between my studio in Austin, Texas, and the WS radio station in San Diego. Now, with Source Connect, not only can we communicate in real time and with HD audio, but it's synced up and is of a high enough quality that I can use it for real-time ADR work, remote recording, and overdubbing, and it even allows me to remotely control a DAW. Source Connect by Source Element. Affordable, high-quality audio and video connection over the internet for all of your production needs.
You know what's all around you every waking moment of your life? Marketing. You're choking on it. I'm Scott Robertson, and when it comes to strategic PR, branding, and marketing, I've seen it all. And actually, I'm still seeing it because bad marketing never sleeps. Join me each week on May the Best Brand Win, right here on Intertalk Radio, and learn how to make the marketing for your brand unforgettable.
Make this your vinyl night. I'm John J.R. Robinson, and every week, music creation comes alive through stories, experiences, and sounds when vinyl records filled our hearts and minds. My friends and I share our tips and techniques used in creation of iconic tracks for recording artists such as Michael Jackson, Eric Clapton, Quincy Jones, and Steve Winwood, to name a few. Vinyl has emerged hot, and the soul of vinyl defines art and passion which burns deepest at night. Tune in every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on intertalkradio.com.
Are you serious about your music? Are you ready to run with the big dogs? The experts at Pt.1 Audio have the gear to get you into the game. From leading manufacturers like Mesa Boogie, Fender, Pioneer, and American Audio. To sound your best, you need the best. Pt.1 Audio can deliver in rehearsal, on stage, and into the big time. Dropping beats, shredding guitar, or making the crowd roar. Whatever you dream, Pt.1 Audio can help make it happen. We are Pt.1 Audio. We want you to play it loud. Pt.1audio.com.
Welcome to Intersect Radio, where music, faith, and life converge. With your host, Aaron the A-Train Smith.
We're back, folks. Thank you. My guest today is John Joseph Thompson. That's music by his band, The Wayside. Before we get started here in the last segment, I want to let you all know that John will be here again next week. He's already committed to a second hour because he's got a lot to talk about and a lot to tell you, and we didn't want to skip over any important details. We want you to get it.
All right.
Yeah.
I can make the 7-minute commute.
Yeah. And get a workout at the same time.
You ever just get bored and want me to come back? Just holler. I'll just
I'll
walk
throw a
over.
stone
That's
over
right.
your house.
I've told somebody, I'm like, if I have a good breeze at my back, I could throw a football, in the direction of Aaron's house. I don't know how far we get.
Where'd that football come from?
It's got the 77s on it.
So, okay, John, you set up this thing in a Catholic bookstore.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive, because I thought you had to get special stamps from the Vatican.
What's actually true, totally true about it is the evangelical stores, the evangelical culture was so much more uptight about rock music, and we could spend days analyzing that. I was floored. Like, I didn't come from a family that had this weird fundamentalist kind of beat to it. We grew up in the Anglican Episcopal tradition, and I was trained in youth group how to kind of engage with the culture and find the threads of God's truth everywhere, and not retreat and create an alternate reality. That's not what I was trying to do with True Tunes. And I started to realize that a lot of Christian music, that's really what the job description was let's create a Christian version of everything.
Right.
And the Christian, the CCM, the evangelical stores tended towards apprehension about anything that felt quote unquote worldly. Whereas I was like, hey, if it feels like it's actually part of the real world, then that's where I want to be. Exactly. At least the gentleman who helped me, Phil Tasqueta, and most of the Catholics that I met didn't have that same kind of fundamentalist uptightness about rock and roll. It wasn't the devil's music. It wasn't some jungle. There wasn't the same kind of even latent racist sort of, oh, that comes from Africa, so it's got, there's just, to me, it seemed silly. That stuff seemed silly. So it was that individual and his family that supported this. He saw the music as having a positive impact, and so he didn't care about whether it was punk or metal or techno or dance music or whatever. But I remember hosting DJing dances and going to churches and trying to get churches to bring their youth groups out for these cool dances where I was going to play cool music. And it was so like none of the Protestant evangelical churches would come. And I was like, what? This is really awesome. And I had to find out they're terrified of rock music and dancing.
I tell you what, you remember that band called One Bad Pig?
Oh, very well. I played.
They freaked me out, man. I'm telling you, when I first saw them, I went, oh man, what's going on here? You know, is this Christian? I had just become a Christian.
Really?
So,
wow.
Yeah, to see One Bad Pig, you know, spiked hair. And, I mean,
smashing guitars.
Punk, you know.
Right.
Couldn't understand what they were saying, but they were playing all the churches and all the Christian festivals. So, yeah.
Yeah, they just saw them last year at Audio Feed, and they were great.
Last year
they did.
Wow.
Yeah,
Speaking of Audio Feed, we're both going to be at Audio Feed this year.
Yeah, we are. I hope we're going to be on stage together.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
That's going to be fun.
Yes.
Yeah.
When is that? July 2nd?
I think it ends July 2nd.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is the day that Sunday night is when we're playing, but it starts, I think, on Thursday and goes through that weekend.
Yeah, folks.
Champaign, Illinois.
Audio Feed. Be there.
Yeah.
Jimmy Abeg's going to be there. Yeah.
It's a lot of fun. I've been the last few years, and it's a lot of fun.
Okay, so you move out. You move out of the Catholic store.
Yeah. Start True Tunes. June 10th, 1989. Yeah. Opened up True Tunes as a separate thing. And it took off. Yeah, it was crazy. Like I was right about the fact that there were more people out there that would be interested in that than other people thought. So it took me a year to actually go from getting the concept approved to actually opening the store. And that whole year was about marketing and about inventory and about business plans and budgets. And, you know, I was 18 years old, graduating high school and figuring out how to run a business. And that's another thing about access. Like I had access to Phil Tasquetta and his experience in retail and his wisdom and his mentorship. I couldn't have done any of this stuff without that. And then I had a couple of friends who were willing to work part-time for True Tunes and then have another part-time job that could actually pay them decent money. You know, people like Chris Langell and Paul Scott, who Paul knew all about computers and I didn't know or care about computers. And he was that. Chris was a Judson graduate who we probably met at a concert, I'm imagining. And he came and we ended up being roommates. And it was just living the dream. It was just all day long, nothing but that Cornerstone kind of buzz of rock and folk and punk and whatever, but it was just all about the truth. It was, and to me, that good, the true, and the beautiful, that was kind of that was the credo for us. And we started to promote concerts in the area a little bit, but we had a good concert scene in Chicago, so we could kind of piggytail off of what Harvest Productions and others were doing. But then after a few years, we took over the second floor of the building and we opened up upstairs, which was a concert venue. The magazine was kind of a funny story that before I even started True Tunes as a separate business, Wheaton Religious was the name of the bookstore that True Tunes was a corner of Wheaton Religious, and it was open on Thursdays till 9. So that was the only night of the week it was open late, and that ended up becoming the time when the rock people would show up at the Catholic bookstore to hang out with me, and we could play some cooler music on the overhead, and you know, it was a lot of fun. But then people from around the world started finding out that we had music that was kind of hard to find. And so the phone would start ringing. And Wheaton Religious had a pretty well-established mail-order business. So the infrastructure was there, and we could ship packages out. So every Thursday night I started getting calls from people who would just say, hey, I hear you know about this. I remember Lust Control, this punk band from Texas. You know, we got the indie cassette of Lust Control. And you couldn't find that in any Christian bookstores. I also carried, like when the 77's Island record came out, you couldn't get it from any Christian distributor. So I went and bought it from a mainstream distributor so that we could sell it, because that was some of the most important music for us. So people started calling, and Phil recognized that I was spending 3 hours every Thursday night on the phone, and people would be on hold for an hour waiting to talk to me about whatever music had come in. So he's like, why don't you write this all down? You're saying the same thing over and over again. Write it all down and fax it to people. So I started to write a weekly newsletter, just longhand, and then we would fax broadcast it out to these people, and then they would fax in or call with their orders.
Mm-hmm.
That's what led to True Tunes.
Amazing.
In fact, Terry, when the first Swirling Eddies record came out, and it was the Daniel Amos guys and some other people, and they all had secret identities, somebody from Frontline Records called and said, Camarillo Eddie would like to speak with you in an interview for your little magazine. And so the first artist interview I ever did was with Terry Taylor in character as Camarillo Eddie. And I was so nervous. I'm up in the office, like, interviewing him on the phone. But again, that was kind of, there was no other way to talk about that music. So the magazine evolved as a mail order catalog, and then the stories just kind of took over. And within a few years, we were printing 50,000 copies of it, and it was going all over the world. And it took on a life of its own. You know,
Mm-hmm.
About half of the writers for True Tunes were me under fake names. So I had all these alternate identities.
You know what? When I was in the 7s, I had a fake name.
Really?
I can't remember it now. But I used to call and get endorsements.
Oh my gosh!
It was a name I had gone on tour with Romeo Void over in Europe, and somewhere over, I think it was Germany. I heard this name. Yeah, this guy worked for a cymbal company that I'd just gotten an endorsement over there, and I loved that name. And we were trying to get endorsements, guitar strings,
anything free,
drum set, anything. And I took on this name, and I got quite a few endorsements
under the fake name.
Under the fake name,
nice.
I got a 60% discount on a really nice drum kit. I think we got a bunch of guitar strings, stuff like that. Yeah, but I would get on the phone. So funny, I would get on the phone and call these people, and sometimes the person I wanted to talk to was busy, and the secretary would take a message and call back.
Right.
And so when they called back, they asked for this other guy.
Right.
And so it would go out on the intercom, phone call for,
right.
And and then, oh, that's me. That's me. And I'd run to the phone and get in character, But that's funny, I didn't know other people thought of that.
Well, somebody just said you should have more people write instead of just you.
Yeah.
But it was a lot to ask somebody to do for free. We didn't have any money. But I did it. Jeff Elbell is a real person. There are people who wrote for True Tunes that weren't me, but about half of them were me.
Yeah, tell the story about that lady that helped you learn how to write better.
Oh yeah, Ramona Garnes, and if she's out there, God bless you, Ramona. She was a long time, 20-some year veteran copy editor for, I think it was the New York Post. She lived in Manhattan. She had been at Woodstock and went to CBGBs all throughout the punk thing. She was probably 20 years older than me. And she found True Tunes, and she wrote me this amazing letter that was very encouraging, how much she loved the music that we talked about, how she loved the enthusiasm and the way I talked about music. But she said, there are things that you do as a writer that could be done better and that would make you more effective at communicating. So she was very gently saying, you need some work. And I hadn't studied it in college. I just was making it up as I went along. So I called her and I said, well, would you help me? Would you, because you've got the credentials. And so she became my personal writing coach for years. So we had this little system where I would write a record review or an interview or an article or an editorial, and I would fax it to her. Again, this is pre-email. And then she would mark it up with all of her editorial marks and fax it back to me, and then get on the phone and actually walk me through all of the changes. And I would make the changes on my end. She wouldn't actually make the changes, but that's how she taught me about active voice and passive voice and about all these tricks and the little crutches I was leaning on that I didn't know I was leaning on. And over the course of several years, my writing chops went up significantly to where people from the music industry started to call me and say, hey, would you write a bio for this band's new record? And I was like, what? And they pay me sometimes I'd get paid more to write one bio than I was making for a whole month of work at True Tunes, which isn't saying very much because I wasn't making very much money. But yeah, and some of the bands insisted that I be the one that write their bio because they felt like I somehow got it. And I attribute that to at least two things. One is I genuinely approached everything as a fan first, not as some snarky know-it-all expert. I was a super fan, but my job was to help the artist communicate what they were trying to communicate. So I was there to serve them, not to expose them or trick them or make myself look cool because I was in the room with them. The second thing was Ramona actually just making my chops better. It's like I knew that she would be critiquing what I wrote, and just having that accountability and having that mentor in your life can elevate your game significantly. So yeah, I started writing bios, and then I wrote Raised by Wolves about 17 years ago. So that was the first full-blown book that I wrote. And that was just a publisher that approached me and asked if I would write about the history of Christian music. So, yeah.
Well, man, that's very fortuitous of you, to get that schooling like that,
It's funny because in high school, they told my guidance counselor said, you should be a writer, and I said, absolutely, I want nothing to do with punctuation. And like if I have to diagram a sentence, forget
English?
Yeah. And look at what happened to me.
We don't need no stinking English. I'm going to be a rock star. Yeah. But God had other plans for you, young man.
Yeah.
He was moving on your behalf. Man, that's a great story. And we're going to have more great real-life stories from John Joseph Thompson next week. And I want to thank you, John, for coming in.
Absolutely. It's been a blast.
I look forward to the second hour. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next Tuesday here on Intersect at the Intertalk Radio Network.
This is Jackie Bertoni from Jackie's Groove. Come join me weekly on my journey through the music business as I take you behind the velvet rope, interviewing industry notables such as Al DiMeola, Michael McDonald, and Al Jarreau, to name but a few. Listen to their stories on being in the studios recording #1 hits and onto the stages throughout the globe. Allow me to be your music historian. You can hear me live every Monday at 2 p.m. and every Wednesday at 12 noon Pacific Standard Time or 24/7 on jackiesgroove.com. Ready to get your groove on?
Hi, this is Tim Dolbear from Eclectica Studios. I'm a full-time mixing and recording engineer. I work with Grammy winners, labels, and indie artists, using state-of-the-art digital mixing and restoration tools and the very best in analog gear. Really, though, it's my ability to bring tracks to life and fulfill your vision for your music. This has made me sought after by producers and artists worldwide. So spend your time working on music and not chasing a mix down a rabbit hole. Go to timdolbear.com and check out our free one-song mix offer.
You know what's all around you every waking moment of your life? Marketing. You're choking on it. I'm Scott Robertson, and when it comes to strategic PR, branding, and marketing, I've seen it all. And actually, I'm still seeing it because bad marketing never sleeps. Join me each week on May the Best Brand Win, right here on Intertalk Radio, and learn how to make the marketing for your brand unforgettable.
Are you serious about your music? Are you ready to run with the big dogs? The experts at Pt.1 Audio have the gear to get you into the game. From leading manufacturers like Mesa Boogie, Fender, Pioneer, and American Audio. To sound your best, you need the best. Pt.1 Audio can deliver in rehearsal, on stage, and into the big time. Dropping beats, shredding guitar, or making the crowd roar. Whatever you dream, Pt.1 Audio can help make it happen. We are Pt.1 Audio. We want you to play it loud. Pitbullaudio.com.